On your Monday episode of Locked On Raptors, trade season is officially here. And what's that? An utter lack of existential dread around the Toronto Raptors?
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, December the 16th, and I'm your host, Sean Woodley. Been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 11 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on the socials. I'm on Blue Sky. The show's on Instagram, and of course, you can join us in the Locked On Raptors Discord server. Link in the description of the podcast. It's free to join, and it's a great place to come hang out with sickos just like you who love the podcast and don't want to work during the day. Of course, you can also support the newsletter. It's free. It's daily. You get original writing from me 5 times a week. We're over 500 subs, which is a wonderful thing. Thanks to all who have subscribed. If you haven't yet, what the hell are you doing? Please do it. It's free. It's a wonderful value proposition. You get Katie Heindel 4 days a week. You get Josh Lloyd fantasy tips. And again, it's all for the low, low price of On the House directly to your inbox. Please go sign up. There's a QR code on the screen if you want to click through if you're watching, or you can go to the link in the description of the podcast. 100% free of charge. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Game Time. You can go and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. And we get rolling here on your Monday edition of the show, with it now being officially trade season. Yes, December the 15th happened yesterday, which means a whole bunch of dudes who signed contracts in the summer are now available to be traded. There will be another wave of guys on January the 15th to become legal trade fodder as well. But for all intents and purposes, trade season is upon us. Slop season, to quote our pals over at the You Know Ball podcast, is here in earnest. And here to give a little trade season primer for your Toronto Raptors is our pal Joseph Casciaro, who I have a question for first. Welcome in, Joey Cash. Lovely to have you. Is it really just like a beautiful, wonderful thing for you, like it is for me, to not be sitting here worried and fretting and covered in dread over the Toronto Raptors leading into a trade deadline? It feels like it's been years since this was the case.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'd rather be thinking about the deadline because it's a contending team and you're like trying to figure out the piece that'll put them over the top. But I think, I assume what you're alluding to is more like the last couple of years of dread, where it was like a middling veteran team anyway, that like you weren't really sure which direction they were going to take it. And for a very brief period in this front office's tenure, you kind of got the feeling that they were going to make the bad choice either way. Sure. That's how I felt the last couple of years. I know that's how I felt last year. And I guess it didn't last right until the deadline, but it definitely consumed trade season when you consider, the OG trade that I loved at the time. I didn't love losing OG, but it was pretty evident he wasn't going to be back, and they got great value for it. And then the Pascal trade that really depressed me because of how terrible the return was.
It's kind of good now, though. Think about it.
Listen, I remember at the time when they got Olynyk and Agbaji. I remember that, I think it was on deadline day, and I remember that day saying, okay, this actually makes the Siakam trade look better. I don't think it made it look good, but it made it look better, and it's incremental wins here. I mean, I was high on Agbaji from the beginning. Like, I thought that was a great guy to take a flyer on. He's kind of proved me right so far. Let's hope we have some conversations today that are proven right a year from now.
That's really all we're trying to do when we get on a podcast together.
Just be right.
Predictions, trying to be right about stuff, just taking big swings. And today, trade stuff, baby. Yeah, we're going to get into some stuff today. We're going to talk about the expiring guys, Bruce Brown, Davion Mitchell, Chris Boucher. What can the Raptors actually get for these guys? Is there any contenders out there who would actually want those guys as final pieces to the puzzle? We'll get into some pie in the sky scenarios. And maybe, is there like a sneaky buying opportunity here for the Raptors if they really want it? But let's start with the general philosophy that you want to see the Raptors use going into this trade deadline, Joe. For me, do like very little. Be quiet, just chill. Don't be the main character, I guess, is kind of all I'm looking for at this deadline. I know we'll probably get into at some point the concept of trading Jakob Poeltl. I think that's a terrible idea for a team that's trying to play serious basketball as soon as next season. And, I've relitigated my thoughts on that a million times. If you're getting an upgrade or a like-for-like replacement, sure. You're not getting that in a trade, though, because odds are the team trading for Jakob Poeltl doesn't have a Jakob Poeltl-like player to send back. Otherwise, they wouldn't be trading for Jakob Poeltl. And so that's kind of where I'm at. Don't do anything too rash. If you move some guys at the back end of the roster for some second round picks, sure, that's great. But I'm of the mind, just kind of laying low and just sort of letting the league figure itself out. It's a very weird cap climate and CBA climate with everything. I'm all right with the Raptors just kind of laying in the weeds and just sort of waiting maybe for the summer or another opportunity to pounce on something. Maybe something crazy appears. We'll get into that. But are you kind of the same mind? Just like, you don't need to really be all that involved in these deadline proceedings if you're the Raptors?
Yeah, and I'm definitely of the same mind when it comes to Jakob Poeltl, as you know, because we've talked about it on air, off air. I wrote about it a couple weeks ago that I think Jakob Poeltl to me is exactly the kind of somewhat underappreciated player that you end up spending years trying to find a guy who does what he does after you trade him. And like, I understand, listen, if there's like the type of offer that blows them away, like the kind of offer that you're like, well, like, how could you not take it? I understand. I don't think that kind of offer is coming anyway, but in general,
every player on the roster, by the way,
right?
Like, that's
exactly.
Standing understood
right.
Truth of trades. So,
but that's probably not coming. And it's like, for the people that are just like, oh, if you can get a couple first rounders for Yak or something like, and you do it, it's like, but not necessarily, because the chances of those picks, like, first of all, you're talking about most likely contenders trading from, so these are not going to be high picks. And the chances of mid to late first round picks turning into a player as good as Jakob Poeltl are actually unlikely.
Yeah.
If you go, by probabilities, and you're trading away a good player who's 29, he's not 39, that can still be part of the next good contending team here, which could be only a couple years away. So yeah, I just don't think you rush to trade a very good player for the sake of boosting your odds a few percent, if that. Like I wrote this week about how even with the Scotty Barnes injury thing, listen, I get, again, because there's the people, no one wants him to be hurt, but you definitely see fans that are very lottery obsessed, looking at it like, okay, well, there was the fear that we were too good to tank, and if Scotty misses a couple weeks again, it's good.
How dare my basketball team win basketball games?
It's good for the tank. It's good for the thing. And I wrote about this a couple days ago, being like, listen, like, you still want the foundation of your rebuild to be on the court as often as possible. And two, don't forget, as much as trust me, I want a Cooper Flagg, I want a Dylan Harper, and I want one of those top 5 guys. But don't forget that even the worst 3 teams only have a 14% chance to win the lottery. And the worst team, the very worst team, has a better chance of getting the 5th pick than they do of getting a top 3 pick. So, like, don't forget that when you're rushing to be like, just get rid of this guy, trade this guy for whatever, it helps the tank, keep Scotty out, it helps the tank. It's like the chances that any of this stuff will actually amount to what you want in the lottery are actually unlikely. Anyway, that's my rant. In terms of what I'd like to see them do, I'd like to see them take anyone that is not actually really part of the core. So I'm like, okay, Scotty obviously is everything. I think Poeltl should still be part of this core going forward. Quickly, you want to see him on the court. Like, it's too early to really make any judgments there. Barrett, as disgusted as I am by his defense, there's no doubt that he's made strides in the offensive end. He's still young. He wants to be here. I think there's some synergy there with Scotty. I'm not, like, I get the sell high thing. I've said myself, I texted Wolf on last night. I'd probably sell high on RJ, but that was a rash in the moment text. Probably not doing that unless something blows me away.
I also text Joe Wolfond with a rash of opinions all the time. He's just like my sounding board for my craziest takes, and we appreciate Wolfond for being that absorbing guy.
Yeah. But I was going to say, like, what I would do is I would essentially, any player that isn't in that core to me, or I'm not 100% sold on, those are the players where it's like, listen, if you get anything of value come your way in discussions for those players, that's where I think as a rebuilding team, you have to explore that. You'd be irresponsible not to. And it's like, It's so hard to say because they've got so many young players. Like they've got these 4 rookies. I mean, technically 5 if you include Chomchi in the G League, but 4 rotation rookies this season, and everyone's all excited about them. But if you're like, if you're realistic about the ceiling for each of those guys, if something came along for, I don't know, a couple of those guys, you can't make too many of your players untouchable, because not all of them are going to be even good rotation players, as promising as it might seem right now. So I'd like them to be very open-minded with anyone that's not actually part of the core.
That makes perfect sense. I do think, those younger guys, I think are probably more dudes you're holding on to as like sweeteners in sort of like an additive trade in the summer if you want to get aggressive. But certainly, I think there are, this is really the nice thing about this team. Going back to the lack of dread is like, the previous versions of the team, it was like, oh, that guy's a pending free agent. Oh, that guy's a pending free agent. Oh, that guy's not very good. Oh, that guy's a pending free agent. And it just felt like the whole roster was in flux. Like this year, there are a bunch of guys who are just here, if not for the long haul, then for at least the medium haul. And you're not under this pressure from contractual situations or whatever to go and move on for a bunch of guys. Like you can let this slow play a little bit. And I think that's how they should be doing it, right? And yeah, if something comes along for a Kelly Olynyk who is around for next year, then sure, you look at that. We'll talk about him coming up here a little bit, I'm sure. And, there's some pending UFAs we're going to get into as well. But yeah, in general, I'm with you. Like, they don't have to go and tear down for the sake of tearing down. They're 7-19. The tank is taking care of itself. Like, it's fine. Like, and even if they pick up some wins in the back part of the season when they have a butter soft schedule and ideally they're healthy by then, I think you're happy to see those guys actually play together and rack some wins up. Like, this isn't a bad thing. They've already banked 19 losses. They're surely going to bank a lot more while Scotty is out. And I think, worrying too much about whether you're 3rd or 6th or 8th in the lottery odds, to your point about the flattened lottery, it just seems very silly to me. Just play what you can with the guys you have and go from there. We're going to come back on the other side here, Cash, and get into the pending UFAs. Bruce Brown, Chris Boucher, Davion Mitchell. Can the Raptors get anything of value for these guys? We'll get into that coming up in just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the #1 sportsbook in North America, which you can go and check out today and get a nice little deal. New customers, you bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And it's not just the NFL. Your Toronto Raptors are very good against the spread. If you want to go just bet the Raptors to cover in games, you're going to probably make yourself some money over the course of the long haul of the season. Even against the Heat they covered, they're just an against the spread machine. So that's the thing you can go do. You can go place money on futures bets. If you think the Mets are going to win the World Series now with Juan Soto, you can put some money on the Mets to win the World Series now with Juan Soto. It's all there for you at FanDuel to go and peruse at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. Back at it here with Joey Cash from The Score, from the Unfiltered Show, which I've been a guest on and hopefully will be in the future if I've not been exiled. It's a great thing. Go support all of Cash's work as we continue on with your trade season primer for your Toronto Raptors. Expiring guys, Cash in particular, 3 guys come to mind. Bruce Brown, we know the deal. Haven't seen him yet. He's reconditioning.
Do we know the deal?
Thinking about how he'll be back soon. We'll see. I'm guessing we get him before the end of the year, but who the hell knows? You got Chris Boucher, final year of what feels like his Raptors tenure, one would think, unless he becomes like one of these Udonis Haslem minimum guys for the rest of time, which like you could do worse. He's fun to have around, but on the court, not exactly giving you great results these days. And then Davion Mitchell is an RFA at the end of the year. Let's start with Davion Mitchell because I think he's maybe the most contentious one here because I know there are a lot of Raptors fans who have really latched onto the guy, and I get it, right? He's like an electrifying defender. He has really impressive on-off metrics defensively. He's just like the kind of guy who endears himself to a fan base, a lunch pail man, if you will. I personally think extending Davion Mitchell is a really bad idea. The Raptors have gotten into the habit recently of giving kind of weirdly long contracts to role players. Khem Birch, Chris Boucher come to mind as the two big ones. Thad Young as well. And I just don't know what the sort of upside on a deal like that is for a guy like Davion Mitchell, who, yes, is only 26 years old, but I think at this point, it's pretty established. The offensive ceiling for him is very low. It's not going to get all that much higher. The defensive stuff is great on the ball. Off the ball, has all kinds of mistakes. And I think we saw in that Heat game on Thursday night, Jamal Shed is very much on track to becoming a Davion Mitchell-like player at the very least. We'll see about the offensive ceiling for him, but the defense is impressive. The playmaking is beyond what Mitchell's capable of right now. And I think extending Davion Mitchell when you have Jamal Shed in the house already feels like a mismanagement of resources. This is not against Davion Mitchell as a player or a guy necessarily, but I just think if you're managing this roster, it just makes sense. If you can get something for Davion Mitchell, I think you probably just got to offload him, whatever. It's like a second-round pick, a couple second-round picks, whatever it is. But the other question here is, as a contender out there looking at Davion Mitchell as someone they need to go pick up at the deadline. Cash, thoughts?
Yeah, that last question there is the one, right? Like, yeah, it's easy for us, and I agree with you. It's like, hey, if someone gives you something for Davion Mitchell, who you probably shouldn't bring back anyway, just based on his contractual status, then you take it because something's better than nothing. And also, if you look at, like, in totality, surplus value, they got him in a deal, flipping Jalen McDaniels for him, and the picks that turned into Shed and
the Blazers second rounder next
That's
year.
right. Next, which is going to be a great pick. So, like, then you can, if you can flip Davion into anything, like, again, that's surplus value on that deal. I do it. The problem is that second question you asked is how many contenders out there are looking for, a pretty one-way defensive guard off the bench? Now, in that role, like, Davion Mitchell's obviously a fine player. I love watching the guy defend. Hate watching him run an offense. But like there's a place for him somewhere, of course. Like even like if the Raptors were trying to win right now, if they were a good team trying to win, I'd be like, don't be in a rush to give this guy up because guys that defend like him, especially on the perimeter, don't fall off trees. And even if it's like 12 minutes a night, those are like 12 valuable minutes on the defensive end. This is where, like, everyone always obsesses over just like losing as much as possible when you're a rebuilding team. But this to me is where the rebuilding stuff comes into play. It's not about just trying to lose games. It's about where you are in your timeline and how that informs the decisions you make. And I think you nailed it because it's exactly what I was thinking, where it's like, this is where, listen, is Jamal Shed as good as Davion Mitchell right now? No. Is he as good as a defender of him right now? No. He, fouls a lot. He's a little over aggressive at times, but he's 4 years younger. Davion Mitchell's an RFA, and as much as I hate to talk like this, like, again, I like Davion Mitchell, seems like a good guy, whatever, but if we're just talking about from like an NBA perspective, and if you're putting your like executive hat on, within the NBA, 26-year-old one-way reserves are pretty disposable. Like, and you can't be latching on to those guys in a rebuild, right? Like, you have to be really shrewd with your decision-making, and so I'm with you. I would take anything of value for seriously, if someone gives you a second round pick, like, I'm taking it at this point because he's not part of the future in my eyes. Yeah. And so you're looking at something is better than nothing. It's just, I'm trying to think of like a team that would give up any kind of draft capital for an expiring Davion Mitchell. It just doesn't make sense. So this to me is one of those catch-22s where it's like, yeah, I think the Raptors would love to turn him into something else of value, but I don't know how many teams love the idea of spending any of that value on Davion Mitchell.
Totally, yeah. It might just be that he walks at the end of the season, and that's it, and it's fine, and you don't get anything back, but that's okay. You got a fun season out of him. He did some good defense stuff for you. He's, he was a gap year guy before Jamal Shed takes over that job. Fine, no problem there. I do have to quickly go back to a thing you said. If you had an executive hat, what would your hat be?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. Yeah. What is an executive hat? Maybe you would just say JC.
Whatever you want.
Like the NN. It'd be like the NN, the Nick Nurse hat, except just say JC. It's my executive
Anything
hat.
but the Nick Nurse hat, I think, would suffice as your executive hat. I'm going kitchen colander with like little antennas attached.
Nice.
That's my executive hat. It's very serious when you walk into a trade negotiation where you're in that hat.
Yeah.
Have fun. what am I talking about? The other guys, Bruce Brown, Chris Boucher. Bruce Brown, obviously, we know, has been a closer on a championship team recently. It's, nearly 2 years away now. He's had a lot of injury stuff since then. We've yet to see him play this year. He also makes $23 million in a league where moving $23 million is extremely difficult. Chris Boucher, expiring, makes 12, 13 million bucks. He is, I'm not sure a really good team is like, got to get Chris Boucher for the closing stretch. He's more of a fun guy, bad team type of dude, I think. But maybe there's a team out there that needs some offensive rebounding punch or something, like a very specific specialist edition. If you had to put the over-under on 2 second-round picks as the return in totality for Boucher and Brown, would you take the over or the under?
That's getting nuts. Take the over. Can I call a push? I think that's actually
a push. Yeah,
I'd call it a push. I think that's actually like a pretty fair expectation. With respect to Boucher, like I could see him being the kind of guy like that does get traded to a good team, a playoff team, and then isn't really part of their playoff rotation, but has like one game where he has 6 offensive rebounds and hits a couple big threes, and like everyone just remembers that. It's like that was a great trade by that team getting Chris Boucher because he has this good game 4 in the first round of the playoffs that like is on national TV, but really it's like he's not actually part of a team's playoff rotation. Mm-hmm. Brown is like he's the interesting one on this team because he at his best is a really good role player in the NBA. Good glue guy, connector, plays both ends. The problem is, what's that?
Great fits.
Yeah. When he's not playing, he's going to cowboy it up on the sidelines. The problem is we haven't seen it in a while now because we literally haven't seen him on the court in a while. Mm. 2, we haven't seen him play at that level in a while. There's always going to be the questions about, how much of it was Jokic induced in Denver there. That's another one where can I see someone taking a flyer on him? Of course, but at some point he's also going to get on the court and prove that he's actually capable of playing. Like, this is another thing that's confused me about this year. And I go back and forth with it sometimes where I'm like, he's probably ready to play, and there's just no point bringing him back. If you're the Raptors right now, they're just going to wait and trade him. And then the other side of me is like, but why would anyone trade for him? There's no indication he can even play right now. Like, It's weird. And then all this stuff came out, if you remember a couple of weeks ago, where Brown speaks to the media and talks about how, he doesn't like the way he understands it, but doesn't like the way he's been perceived here in Toronto because he just hasn't had a chance to show people that he does want to be here and play with these young guys. And he was supposed to come back on that road trip. That was 2 weeks ago. Now we just haven't heard from Bruce Brown at all. And it went from he's
a thing that said soon this week.
Right. So, yeah, it's like soon, but maybe not for the Raptors. I don't know. Yeah. That's another guy. Like, is any good team giving up a first round pick for Bruce Brown right now?
No.
Right. So it's like a second rounder, I guess. And then even for Boucher, I guess maybe someone gives up. I feel like with Boucher would be one of those weird, almost fake, like protected second rounders.
Like top 55 protected.
Yeah. So that's why I'm calling it a push, because it's like, I think there's more of a chance you get that stuff for them than for Davion. Mm-hmm. But even then, it's like, I almost feel like it's wishful thinking for them to turn both of Brown and Boucher into even second rounders. So maybe I should have gone with the under. I could see one of those guys being moved. It feels like wishful thinking to be like, oh yeah, they'll move both of them and they'll get draft capital in both deals.
Right. I'm actually going to take the under to answer my own question. I don't think Bruce Brown is getting traded. And I think it's just because of the fact that moving $23 million in this environment is going to be hard. And it's going to be like, look, I don't know about you, Joe. I don't like doing admin. I don't like doing paperwork. It sucks. This is why I like, my dad does my taxes. I'm a pathetic, garbage man. Okay. I don't like admin at all. And the amount of admin that's going to have to go into facilitating a trade for Bruce Brown to some contender that's maybe in the first or second apron is going to be so much that everyone's going to look around and be like, are we really doing this paperwork for Bruce Brown? Really? Like, no one wants to do paperwork, especially for marginal upgrades. And I have a hard time finding the salary matching to come back. And if I'm the Raptors, I don't know if I really want to be taking on extra money, in exchange for Bruce Brown. Like if I'm getting an expiring $23 million, sure, that's one thing. And I know they're going to have maybe a little bit more flexibility next year than it seemed like with the cap going up and all that stuff. Like they're not going to be strapped necessarily, and they have a lot of young, cheap depth. But I just don't quite see where a deal is coming in where there's a value for both teams to make it happen with Bruce Brown. And I think I've kicked around this idea before. I think it's still very much a reasonable possibility that the Raptors keep Bruce Brown through the end of the year, retain his bird rights, and just bring him back on a deal that everyone agrees, including Bruce Brown, is more in line with his value. If he's coming back on a 2-year, $20 million, 3-year, $30 million deal to actually just be like a nice connected role player for this team that, is going to be very young at the back end. And it's nice to have a little sage veteran wisdom. And then you can probably trade him to a good team more easily when he's making $10 million next season. Like, maybe that's just the way this goes. Maybe that's the way Bruce Brown gets another deal and the Raptors, can still kind of get some value out of him, whether it's on the floor or via trade down the line. Like, I don't think that's a crazy potential outcome here, considering just how hard it is to trade within this very fun and cool CBA we have, Joey Cash. Come back on the other side. We're going to wrap things up with a look at what if the Raptors get weird and start buying? This could happen. They've done it before when they've been well below 500. You never know what's going to happen with these dudes. We're going to get into the concept of pie in the sky scenarios for your Toronto Raptors to close things out. Just one sec. Today's show is brought to you by our pals over at Game Time, the single best place to buy tickets for the sporting events you want to go to. Of course, concerts, theater shows, comedy shows, all under their umbrella as well. And Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I love Game Time. I'm a regular user of Game Time. I buy tickets for basically any sporting event I'm going to through Game Time because I know I'm getting the best deal because they have the lowest price guarantee. Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference if you find tickets in the same row and section somewhere else for less. It's a great thing. I've used it for WNBA games. I bought Las Vegas Aces tickets this year right before the game. That was great. I bought tickets for a Seattle Storm game last summer, right outside the arena. I was just standing there and I bought tickets for like $6 on Game Time, 20 minutes before tip off. It was awesome. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Well, it's game time, of course. Wrapping it up here with Joey Cash from The Score as we start to look at the fantastical, the far-fetched, the pie in the sky potential trade deadline happenings for your Toronto Raptors. Look, they're probably not going to go and buy. As I've said before, I think they're probably best just sitting this one out and hanging out on the sidelines, maybe catching a couple of picks coming back for their expiring guys and not being all that crazy. That said, the CBA is weird. I think it's going to force teams to sort of adapt the way they think about things at times and, the sort of cycles of player addition. I think the summer and free agency feels like it's kind of dead at this point. And we know the Raptors in the past have used the trade deadline as a way to kind of get a head start on their offseason. We think back to Serge Ibaka back in the day. We think back, of course, to Jakob Poeltl. They've done this before where they've traded for guys with the intent of having them be part of the team well beyond. They don't view each season within its own little bubble. It's sort of laying the ground for the next season early at the deadline. With that, the Raptors, they have some stuff. They have their pick this year. I doubt they're trading that, considering it looks like it's going to be pretty good. But they do have that Blazers pick. They have all of their own picks in the cupboard, and they have that Pacers pick in 2026. Do you think, perhaps, Joey Cash, there's a world in which they look around, maybe some player shakes loose. There's a certain team that rhymes with Schmooshmorlin Schmellikins that has a whole lot of stuff they could potentially be doing. They are very much like the Raptors were last year with just like a whole lot of flux, a lot of uncertainty about what their team is going to look like. DeJounte Murray is basically just Western Conference Dennis Schroeder, very similar basketball teams. Is there a world in which you think the Raptors say, let's get a head start on the market, use some of our extra pick capital and our very movable contracts we have on hand between Kelly Olynyk? There is, the Chris Boucher, Bruce Brown expiring deals. Maybe I don't think they're going to get crazy with like a Quickly or Barrett. That seems like a way further down the line thing. But could you see a world in which the Raptors get a little crazy here and say, let's jumpstart the market and buy someone who we know is going to be part of this team for the long haul at this deadline. What you got?
I hate to be an anti-fun bearer of bad news, but yeah,
get off the stage. Give me some tomatoes.
That's a waste of a good tomato. I really don't think that's happening this year. Like, I get everything you're saying. I know that actually has been, this front office's MO before, and it's not a bad way to operate. I just don't think that's the case this year. Like, I've said a couple times this year, one thing about the front office going into this season, whether it was Masai's comments on media day or just, reading the tea leaves that are out there, I feel like this is a front office that after a couple years of like not really knowing what they were, has a very good handle and has a lot of self-awareness right now for where they are in the competitive cycle, what they're trying to do this year, or what they're rather not trying to do this year. And I don't really think they're thinking too much outside that box. Now, that's not to say, again, like, of course, if a good young player who could be part of the core shakes loose and he's gettable without the Raptors having to overpay, like, of course they'll listen to that and like they'll do it. But I'm not sure that player will shake loose, and I don't think the Raptors are going to be like aggressive by any means in trying to be a buyer even for young talent. Like, I really do think this is a gap year in a lot of ways for them. They've come into the season knowing that. They're very aware of where they are in the cycle. And I think they're fine kind of, as maybe bad as it is to say or sounds, I think they're fine just kind of sitting this one out, and you can almost say that for the season as a whole, and that they were fine sitting this one out from a competitive standpoint. But as we've seen, there can still be positives and good to be found within that, whether it's the way the young guys have developed and the way everything's kind of coalescing going into the future. Like, I've said before, I don't think this is going to be a really prolonged rebuild. I don't think Masai Ujiri has the stomach for that, and I don't think they need to have the stomach for that based on the young talent they've already accumulated. I think this is like, if all goes well, it's a 1-year tank and rebuild that launches another long run of competitive basketball. I don't think they're very interested in straying too far from that, even if, like, I know the kind of guys we're talking about. If we're talking about a young player, it's not someone who's going to make them good this year, but I just don't even think that's necessarily on their radar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, contrary to the long run-up to that leading question I gave you, I agree with you. I think just being a normal team and not doing sort of outside-the-box brain genius stuff is probably the right move. I do think that this summer there's a very real chance they could go and get a little aggressive and try to sort of expedite the process, especially if they get like a really high pick and it's like, oh, well, we got this really high pick and we also have all these future picks. What if we dip into that future cash a little bit to sort of supplement what we've got here and just sort of run with a really young, interesting core that's all kind of locked in for many years, either on rookie deals or second deal extensions. That said, there's one guy, Joe, who there was some noise about this week. Not any noise that it sounds like the Pelicans are trying to trade him. It sounds like people are calling the Pelicans, per the Shams reporting, whatever you can decipher from how that guy writes sentences. There seems to be people calling up and be like, yo, what's up with Herb Jones? Is he available? He's the one guy for me where I sit there and go, if all these other teams are into it, maybe the Raptors should be trying to get on that call as well, because Herb Jones is on an absolute scam of a contract. He makes $13 million for the next 2 seasons beyond this one. He is one of the best defensive players alive at a position where the Raptors could really use one of the best defensive players alive, having traded one of the best defensive players alive who plays that position just a year ago and have been missing that guy ever since. What is the most you would offer for Herb Jones right now? Like, at the deadline, the Raptors go, you know what? Like, we just need to get Herb Jones in the damn door to be this defensive stopper next to Scotty Barnes, who's going to hit a high percentage of his threes. He's going to give insulation to Emmanuel quickly at the point of attack. Like, what is like the peak Godfather offer you? It's going to take a Godfather offer, right? The Pelicans are not in a position where they have to go just trade a guy on maybe the most team-friendly contract in the NBA for the quality of the player, just for shits and gigs, right? Like, there is... it's going to take an absolute Godfather offer to make them budge on that. how far would you go in season right now if you're Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster?
Man, get ready to throw another tomato at me because I'm gonna say not. Yeah, I'm gonna say not far. I wouldn't put a Godfather offer together for Herb Jones. Look, I really like Herb Jones. I agree. He's on one of the biggest bargain contracts in the league. He's still mid-20s, like in his prime.
26, yeah.
Yeah, one of the best defenders on the planet, no doubt. The shooting, listen, I'm not convinced that he had a really good shooting year last year on not crazy volume. For his career, he's not that great of a shooter. So could it have been that last year was the beginning of him now being a good shooter on okay volume? Sure. But I don't think the track record of the volume is there for me to be convinced he's a good shooter yet. And if what we're talking about is like an elite defensive forward who knows his role, I'll give him that, and has some shooting upside, I'm just not to me, that is not the kind of guy a rebuilding team should be putting a Godfather offer together. And the other thing that I think about too is to me, if I'm on team Keep Yak, which I think we're both on, or not, I know we're both on, and I envision a front court where you've got Scotty as like a point forward, like Scotty's like leading the offense, but defensively he's at least a 3, if not higher. So you got a front court of Barnes and Poeltl, and you need to find someone like in between them as a 4. Yeah, in theory, like a guy like Herb, it's like, wow, great defensive front court. I think you want a little more surefire shooting between Scotty and Yak. Like, I'm thinking of like a stretch 4 for the future to put between those two guys. That's not a defensive sieve, has some defensive pop, but I feel like you trade for a guy like Herb, and it's all well and good. He's a solid player, knows his role, and your defensive front court's awesome. And then I feel like 6 months from now, if they're trying to compete, we're talking about like, they really got to find some shooting in the front court. This isn't working. What can we turn Herb Jones into, And like, that's not a knock on him. It's just that he's one of those like good players that if you're a contender, I think he can move the needle for you. But with how far away the Raptors are, I just don't think he moves the needle enough to be giving up that much. Again, if he could be had, on the cheap, of course you take it, but he can't be had on the cheap. As you were saying, like, we're talking about Godfather offers, and where the Raptors are, even on that contract, I just don't think Herb Jones is the guy they should even be thinking about making a Godfather offer for.
Too damn sensible. Look, earlier in the week, I was kind of messing around in the Locked On Raptors Discord. The Fake Trade Sickos channel is it's a wild, wild west over there. And I was kicking around like, I really love Herb Jones. I want to see him play defense. I want to see a Scotty Barnes, Herb Jones, Jonathan Mobo 3-4-5. Like nothing I've ever wanted to see in my entire life. Throw Grady Dick out there. I don't care. The Pacers pick, throw it, do it. I don't care.
Wait. So you would trade Grady to get Herb Jones?
I softened on that.
Okay.
I was kicking it around as like, I'll
go get a tomato and throw it at you now.
Night, and I'm like, who needs Grady Dick? You got Jacoby. It's cool. And so, I've come down on that. I think you're right. I think it's maybe not quite the timing for it. They have other means by which to acquire a defensively oriented wing. Maybe has some more shooting juice. Like I've said this before, like I think they're a sneaky consolidation trade team with the young guys they have and the extra picks they have. They're not the Thunder. They're not the Rockets. They're not going to be in the sort of top end of those conversations. But, there could be some guys who come along who just fit the bill. And the Raptors will have the stuff to throw at that when the time comes. They don't got to go rush it for Herb Jones as much as I love Herb Jones. Very, very much. Cash, we're going to wrap it there. Do you have anything you want to promote for the good people? Any parting shots?
Parting shot, the only thing, just to build on what you were saying, I was going to mention, I think, is it one of 7 teams? The Raps are like one of 7 teams or something like that have all of their future first rounders. Like they control all of their future first rounders for the next 7 years. So that's obviously not nothing. In terms of where people can find the work, the usual, the Score app, you can read my features. They're mostly covering the Raptors this year, but a little general NBA as well. And then you can watch more of my general NBA content on the Score's YouTube page, the weekly Unfiltered series on Fridays, and the studio show, the Unfiltered Show, that goes up on Tuesdays, which Woodley has been on and will be on again.
Hell yeah. Awesome stuff. Everyone go and support Cash's work and the Score's wonderful NBA coverage team. You can find me at woodleysean.bsky.social. You can go and check out the Locked On Raptors Instagram page. You can find us in the Discord server, link in the description of the podcast. Free to join as always. We'd love to see you there. And of course, the newsletter, free 5 days a week to your inbox. You get my original writing. I write things like about how the Raptors need to do more dunks, and then all of a sudden the Raptors do more dunks. I'm influencing over at the newsletter, so please go and support it. You got the QR code on the screen to click through, the link in the description of the podcast. It's all over my socials as well. Thank you so much for rocking with the show. Have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll talk about the Raptors. God, I keep forgetting who they play tonight. Raptors Bulls? Raptors Nets? I think it's the Bulls. Yeah.
The Bulls.
It's not a good team. So we'll talk about that on Tuesday with another episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging. Bye-bye. Oh, cruel.